Good day, dear listeners, and welcome to our journey through the ancient scriptures. Today, we delve into a story shrouded in mystery and profound faith, the tale of Enoch, a man who walked so closely with God that he did not see death. In a world barely finding its footing after the dawn of creation, amidst the long shadows of early humanity lived a man whose life shone with a unique light. His story, though brief in the sacred texts of Genesis, echoes through time with eternal significance. Prepare to be inspired by the life of one who truly pleased God. Imagine the world in its early days, not long after the expulsion from Eden. The earth was vast, untamed, and yet brimming with fresh vitality. Rivers flowed freely, mountains rose majestically, and the first generations of humanity began to multiply upon its surface. Lifespans were extraordinary. Hundreds of years stretched out before men, allowing for profound experiences, deep wisdom, and, unfortunately, ample time for wickedness to take root. This was the lineage of Adam, the first man, through his righteous son, Seth. For generations, men lived, worked the earth, raised families, and slowly, painstakingly, forged what would become human civilization. They saw the consequences of sin, the toil, the sorrow, the broken relationships that began with Cain and Abel. And as families grew into tribes and communities, the choice between following God and following one's own desires became more pronounced. Into this world, approximately 622 years after creation, a boy named Enoch was born. His father was Jared, a man who himself lived for many centuries. Jared had named his son Enoch, a name often associated with dedicated or trained. Perhaps even then there was a sense of purpose for this child, a whisper of a different path. Enoch grew up surrounded by the stories of his ancestors. He would have heard tales of Adam and Eve in paradise, of their fall, and of the promise of redemption. He would have known of Seth, the appointed son, through whom the line of God-fearing men continued, and as he matured, Enoch witnessed the accelerating pace of the world around him. People were building, farming, creating, but tragically they were also increasingly choosing paths away from the Creator. The seeds of violence sown by Cain were beginning to sprout into widespread corruption. What was it like to live for hundreds of years? To see generations born and pass away? To witness the slow erosion of moral boundaries and the fading memory of God's intimate presence among men? It was into this complex, ancient, and rapidly changing world that Enoch was called to live. And, unlike many of his contemporaries, Enoch chose a different way. He chose to walk with God. The Bible's description of Enoch is strikingly concise yet profoundly powerful. Enoch walked with God after he begot Methuselah 300 years, and had sons and daughters. Genesis 5:22. What does it truly mean to walk with God in such a time? It implies more than just acknowledging God's existence. It speaks of an intimate, continuous communion, a life lived in constant awareness of His presence. Imagine Enoch. While others were consumed by the building of cities, the accumulation of wealth, or perhaps even by the emerging acts of violence and idolatry that would eventually lead to the Great Flood, Enoch was pursuing something entirely different. His steps were ordered by divine will. His thoughts aligned with divine wisdom. His heart beat in rhythm with the heart of God. This walk was not passive. It was an active, deliberate choice every single day for 300 years. It meant living by faith in a world where direct revelation might have been rare, and where the evidence of God's holiness was increasingly obscured by human sin. Hebrews 11:5 tells us, "By faith Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found, because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God." This confirms that his walk was a walk of profound faith, and it was this faith that pleased God. What might this walk have looked like in daily life? Perhaps it meant a life of prayer and meditation, seeking God's voice in the rustling leaves of the primordial forests, in the flow of rivers, and in the quiet of his own spirit. Perhaps it meant a life of obedience, meticulously following whatever divine instructions had been passed down from Adam and Seth, instructions that would have formed the earliest moral code for humanity. It surely meant a life of integrity, setting himself apart from the growing wickedness around him. While others might have succumbed to the temptations of their age, perhaps early forms of idolatry, injustice, or unrestrained lust, Enoch remained steadfast. He was a man of integrity, a beacon of righteousness in a darkening world, and it also suggests a life of proclamation. The book of Jude in the New Testament reveals a fascinating detail about Enoch. It was also about these that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, saying, "Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on all, and to convict all the ungodly of all their deeds of ungodliness that they have committed in such an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things that ungodly sinners have spoken against him." Jude 1:14-15. This incredible prophecy tells us that Enoch was not just a quiet contemplative. He was a prophet. He stood in a world growing increasingly godless and declared a future judgment. Imagine the courage it must have taken for one man, amidst centuries of increasing moral decay, to speak of God's coming judgment. His walk with God was not a private escapism. It empowered him to boldly confront the sin of his generation. Enoch lived for 365 years. For 3 centuries, after the birth of his son Methuselah, he steadfastly walked with God. And during this long period, he carried a heavy burden, the knowledge of God's impending judgment. His prophecy, recorded for us by Jude, speaks of the Lord coming with 10,000s of his holy ones. A clear vision of divine intervention and reckoning. Think of the society Enoch was preaching to. Genesis 6, which follows Enoch's brief mention, describes a world where the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. It talks about giants, the Nephilim, and a rapid descent into violence and depravity. Enoch stood as a lone voice, perhaps, or one of very few, calling out to a generation that was largely deaf to God's warnings. He was a prophet without a widely recorded ministry, yet his words echo through eternity. He warned of the ungodly deeds, the harsh words spoken against God, the pervasive ungodliness that defined his era. His prophetic ministry would have been one of stark contrast. On one hand, he lived a life of deep, personal communion with the Creator, a life of peace and divine presence. On the other, he was compelled by that very communion to speak uncomfortable truths to a world bent on self-destruction. He saw the future, not just in vague terms, but with a clarity that allowed him to declare the Lord's coming with his holy ones for judgment. What kind of opposition did Enoch face? We are not told directly, but given the nature of humanity's rebellion at that time, it's safe to assume his message was not universally welcomed. He might have been ridiculed, scorned, or even threatened. Yet, he persevered. His faith was not just an inner conviction. It was a visible, audible declaration of God's truth, a testimony against the rising tide of evil. This makes his walk with God even more profound. It wasn't just quiet devotion, it was courageous obedience in the face of spiritual darkness. His life was a living sermon, his words a direct warning from the Almighty. And for this unwavering dedication, God had a special plan for Enoch. Then comes the most astounding part of Enoch's story, a unique event in human history until the ascension of Elijah, and, ultimately, Jesus Christ himself. Genesis 5:24 simply states, "Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." Think about that for a moment. he was not. Not he died. Not he passed away. But he was not. And the reason? For God took him. This is an act of divine intervention, a direct translation from the earthly realm to the divine. Enoch did not experience death. He bypassed the common lot of humanity, a testament to his extraordinary relationship with God. Imagine the scene. Perhaps one day, as Enoch walked in his usual communion with the divine, he simply continued walking into the very presence of God. No struggle, no pain, no earthly demise. Just a seamless transition, a divine embrace that lifted him beyond the veil of mortality. His family, his son, Methuselah, who would later become the longest living man in history, his other sons and daughters would have searched for him, but he was nowhere to be found. The very earth he walked upon no longer held him. The testimony of God's favor on him was undeniable. He was not, for God took him. This miraculous departure serves as a powerful symbol. It demonstrates God's profound pleasure in Enoch's life of faith and obedience. It shows that God rewards those who diligently seek Him and live according to His will. It's a glimpse, so early in human history, of a destiny beyond the grave for those who truly connect with their Creator. Hebrews 11:5 reiterates this. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found, because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God. His being taken was the ultimate affirmation of a life well lived in God's sight. It underscored that walking with God leads to an outcome far grander than mere earthly existence. Enoch's story, though brief, is a cornerstone of faith. It teaches us several timeless lessons. First, the possibility of intimacy with God. In a world that often feels chaotic and distant from the divine, Enoch shows us that a close, continuous walk with God is not only possible, but deeply rewarding. It's about more than ritual. It's about relationship. Second, the power of faith. Enoch's life was defined by faith. He believed God, walked by faith, and pleased God by faith. His story is a powerful reminder that without faith it is impossible to please Him, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who seek Him. Hebrews 11:6. Third, courage in conviction. Enoch was a prophet who spoke God's truth to a rebellious generation. His life reminds us that walking with God often requires standing against the prevailing culture, speaking out for righteousness, even when it's unpopular. And finally, the hope of eternity. Enoch's divine departure offers a profound message of hope. It reveals that physical death is not the final word for those who walk with God. It foreshadows the resurrection and the eternal life that awaits those who live by faith. Enoch's life stands as a beacon from antiquity, a testament to a singular, unwavering devotion to God. He didn't build great cities or conquer nations, but he achieved something far greater. He walked with his Creator, pleased Him, and was granted an end that defied human mortality. His story encourages us all to seek that same intimate walk, to live by faith, and to trust that God indeed rewards those who diligently seek Him.